Welcome everybody. Champions Cup weekend round 2 has come and gone. Thoughts on that on the way. In news today, Monday, Tyke Furlong signed a 2-year contract extension. He will be at Leinster until 2027. Andrew Porter has also signed a 2-year contract extension at Leinster, also there until 2027. Furlong now 32 years old, Porter 28. Rory O'Connor of the Irish Independent, good to see you in the studio.
You too, Joe.
Thanks for coming in, appreciate it.
No problem, I do work here, it's okay.
I had no choice. Weekend that was, so on the provincial side of things, Friday night in Castra, Keane Tracy was there, Munster were beaten 16-14. Saturday afternoon, Ulster 19, Bordeaux 40 in Belfast was a very painful one for Ulster. And then Saturday, Aviva Stadium, Saturday evening, Leinster 15, Clermont 7, just 3 points scored in that second half. Challenge Cup, we should mention Connacht beat Perpignan, so they're 2 wins for 2. Other notable results, themes from round 2. Toulouse look very good. You won't be shocked to hear Anton Dupont is just, to be that outrageous and that consistent is kind of scary. 64-21 winners away from home against Exeter. La Rochelle and Ronan O'Gara beat Bristol 35-7, 2 wins from 2. And then, Rory, we might just briefly touch on it, the South African angle to this tournament. So the Sharks lost 56 points conceded, lost at Welford Road. They had made 8 changes for the game. The Stormers rested 6 players. They were beaten at Harlequins. 5 Stormers made their debuts, 53-16. And then the Bulls did play a strong side, but suffered shock home defeat to Northampton. Some of the comments are interesting from the various participants. So John Plumtree, the Sharks coach, he'd made the 8 changes for Welford Road, where obviously he's been asked, 8 changes, John, some of your better players not playing. He said, look, it's on the organisers sending us up here for 1 week at a time. It is not high performance. That was the phrase he kept using. This is not high performance. We should be staying a fortnight. And he was citing the URC tend to do that a bit better. They still, by the way, have a decent chance of qualification. Stormers are on 0 points and the Bulls are on 0 points. So John Dobson, who did play a strong Bulls side but lost nonetheless, said, as South Africans, we have to do better in this competition. And he was insisting we're not disrespecting it. I don't know how we solve it. It's like being invited to someone's birthday but then complaining about the chips. We are so grateful to be here. And just before anyone says this is not just a South African thing, we touched on the French last week. It's worth mentioning even this week, Johan van Graan retained just 4 players for Bath's trip to Benetton and lost by a point. We're getting to a stage with this tournament, unfortunately, Rory, in the group stages, whereby you need asterisks beside teams that have played their best team or their worst team. Like there's a deciphering to do with some of these results.
Well, there's a couple of things at play. There's too many matches, clearly. If you can't... One thing that has improved the URC in the last number of years is that there are fewer match weeks. And we still have weakened teams in the URC. We're quite used to weakened teams in the URC. We're going to see it in the Interpros in the next couple of weeks. The Irish teams will rest their Irish internationals for probably their away games. That's the way it's worked in the last couple of years. We don't like it particularly, but we get used to it. But what Martin and he has done at the URC since he's come in is he's gone, right, we don't do games during internationals as much, and it has improved as a competition. There's still too many games, and you couldn't say there's too many European games, but clearly teams even the English teams now have a maximum number of games players are allowed to play across the year, so they have to rest players. The RFU have to rest players. Even Leinster and Munster have rested players for these last 2 weeks. Ulster obviously rested players going to Toulouse in the hope of getting results against Bordeaux, but also because they have derbies that they need to win to get back into this tournament next year. Everyone is at it to a degree, and the other factor is that you don't need to win all your games to get through in this tournament, and unless you are Leinster, Toulouse, La Rochelle, maybe the Sharks, although they sacrificed this round, you don't really feel like you're going to win it. You have a much better chance of winning the URC. So you're almost in a position where your focus is qualifying for next year and trying to win the other tournament. So it's imperfect. It's broken. I think it is broken. I think we can say that now. I don't see it changing anytime soon because The broadcast contracts are signed. Investec are on board. Investec are a company that were attracted into this tournament because of the South African connection. We are in rugby has kind of gone down a path where they've made these kind of these divergent paths with competition structures and season structures, and it's really hard, and broadcast deals, which it's really hard to get it back. Like it's going to take like almost to blow up the entire game and start again if you're ever going to be able to do it. So we're left with this imperfect thing where we're suddenly European teams and South African teams are playing in the same tournament, and they're having to traverse the globe to play a pool game when you're playing a derby the following week. Like, South Africans have 2 rounds of derbies coming up, and that's the big thing for them, really. They want to beat each other. They value the URC probably higher than we do. They see that as the competition that's worth winning, and they don't think they're ready either to win the Champions Cup at the moment. So it just means that this has been the way for how long are we talking about this? Like, I think it feels worse this year, but for the last couple of years, the pool you can kind of take or leave, and you get going in April. And really, the last 16 you could probably take or leave that as well. And when the quarterfinals get going, this is a great tournament. And yet last year the Bulls sent over a dummy team for a quarterfinal because they prioritised the URC. So even then, we weren't immune from these things. So it's been a bit rubbish, I think, the first 2 weeks. I enjoyed Leinster Claremont at the weekend. Proper contest. Wasn't a great game, but it was a great contest. Claremont was Cast Munster, again, not a great game, but a compelling, a lot of stuff we can get out of it. Ulster's games, I know they sent the weekend team to Toulouse and they've been well beaten in both of them, but I've been interested in them because both teams are going for it. Even watching Toulouse carve up in Exeter, there was an entertainment value to that, but this weekend was better than last weekend, probably because there was no storm. But really, it's almost like the URC over Christmas is going to be better because we know we're watching a bit more.
Yeah, as you said, this has been coming for several years, so we won't labour the point. It's the same theme this time of year. Let's go through the games. Kicked off in Castra on Friday night, 16-14. The image that sticks in the memory is Jack Crowley not finding touch at the death, but it's wrong to just hone in on that as the moment, because that was emblematic of a fairly average Munster performance at large.
Average is putting lipstick on the pig. I think, I thought it was pretty dire. I don't think that this is not a great Munster team, and they're currently with an interim coaching ticket and with all sorts of speculation as to what they're going to do next. And it does look like the solution is going to come from within. But the longer this drags on, the more you wonder, like, are the players, like, how much are they worrying about what's going on externally? How much you've no idea who you're playing for next season at the moment. Certainly from the outside it looks like that anyway, and that's not a good picture.
Shouldn't they be very cognizant of the fact that there's a fair chance it's Mike Prendergast?
No, surely, yeah. But if it is Mike Prendergast, then back him and do it now. Like, I don't see why they did this with Graham Rowntree. They dragged Graham Rowntree up to Lansdowne Road for interviews. They dragged that process up dragged it on for months, and eventually they handed it to Rowntree, and it really, I thought, put him on the back foot when he got the job in the first place, because the players knew. Like, one stage they were at Ireland training and Rowntree was in the Aviva doing an interview in a different part of it, and they were looking at him going to be dragged up to Dublin to talk to David Nucifora. There seems to be a bit of back and forth between Munster and the RFU over the RFU would like a senior figure alongside Prendergast, and I think the Chris Boyd move suggests that this is almost, this is a solution to the issue. I just think you got to back them. It's not the reason necessarily they played so badly on Friday, but it was more in keeping what they were doing in October.
And so why was it bad? Some of the specifics.
Just their accuracy, like that word so often crops up in rugby. I know it's a catch-all for everything, but like their line-out was really good against Stade Francais. But I really, we talk about caveats. Like Stade have been so bad. I don't know if you saw the red card for Macalou at the weekend, but it's like they all want Christmas off.
It's comical.
It's incredible. Yeah. It's so unprofessional. I know you talked about it with Keane last week, but it was they looked like a shambles of a team. So there was always that. Like, Munster beat the Lions in Thomond on the weekend of the Australia game. It was a good win, but it didn't look like a great performance from what I saw of it. It was the night of the Australia game. Then they hammer Stade, and I think there was a bit of a sense from those who weren't kind of paying close attention that all was right in the world, that this was a great win over a French team. But really, you watch that game and you're like, what are they beating here, and what does this mean? You knew the Cast, which is the quintessential tricky place to go, they always come out strong. They always, I know it wasn't full, but it's a tough place to play. It's like for some reason that stadium it is febrile, even when there's no one there. There's the people who show up, they show up. They're not like an Aviva Stadium crowd. They're not a passive crowd. They make it hard for you. They make life difficult for a Jack Crowley.
They were bright and they had a tempo to their game, and they dominated like a huge portion of the first half. When Munster were so close in the scoreboard at half time, it felt like really kind of the major sheen on that, because Cast dominated.
Yeah, and they like players like Abraham Papali'i, who was at Connacht and he picked up a lot of red cards when he was at Connacht, but he also had moments where he ran over people, and he was running over people consistently. They had really...
And is there an argument that he's so much bigger and stronger he should be running over Munster players?
Oh, he is. If you give him the ball and you let him get ahead of steam up, he will do damage. The key is don't let him get ahead of steam up, disrupt their ball. But Munster were unable to keep their own possession, and they weren't able to disrupt what Cast were doing either, and they were getting overpowered by a French team on a slow pitch. It happens. It's not losing the Cast is not a disgraceful result, and even if they'd played well and lost against the Cast team at home, like Cast are good enough on their day at home on a one-off game to beat anyone. Yeah. They're unbeaten, I think, at home in the top 14. This is not a bad result per se, but the performance is shocking. Like I just think, having been so good against a bad Stade Francais team, and knowing that you need to pick up these points, and knowing that this is a team that you can beat, to beat yourself in the way that they did, right, that is what I thought was really poor. And then to pick up the injuries they did along the way is just so damaging to what they're like. They have a thin enough squad, and they've just got all these bodies back on the pitch, and had to lose Casey, probably their best player this season, for what looks like, there's been no confirmation yet, but it didn't look like a good knee injury anyway. No. O'Mahony, when you see a player just pull up like that, looks like it's definitely going to be his Christmas, and all the rest of it. It wasn't disciplined. The line-out looked like they'd fixed it, then it was terrible again. I mean, line-out's an issue across the board in Irish rugby right now.
Yeah.
Inability to hold on to the ball. Like this Munster team, when they were good, it was their skills, it was their ability to play that was so good. And then Crowley making the errors that he did. I mean, he is... we came into this year as Ireland's number 10, looking for a central contract, looking to be the man, and his confidence has clearly taken a hit, and I think it took a hit before November. I mean, November didn't help. But
you mentioned to me, that was okay to say it on air because it's not overly behind the wall, but you mentioned even just in his press dealings, you think his confidence has been a bit affected. Yeah,
I just think he often overcomplicates his answers, and look, being interviewed by a group of people is not an easy thing to handle. And I think we sometimes in the media we take for granted that you should be 24-year-old. His age has nothing to do with it. But if you're having a bad day and you walk into a room full of journalists and they throw a lot of questions at you, like I'm sure it's easy to kind of get yourself tied in knots a little bit. But I just think when I first encountered him, there was a clarity and a confidence to him, and a very a lack of clutter. I'd say he kind of was very singular in what he was able to do, and maybe that was things were simple to him. This is when he was an under 20, and even at the start of last year, he'd been on such an unbroken run. It's probably where Sam Prendergast is now. He's like, it's all been step up, tick that box, step up, and now
no scar tissue.
There's no scar tissue, and I think he played an awful lot of rugby last year, and his form definitely dipped after the Six Nations, and it probably didn't get called out as much as it might have done, because everyone, I think he was still on the good vibes of the spring. But by the time we talked to him in South Africa, when things hadn't gone brilliant in the first test, I did come away from it going, God, he's overcomplicating a lot of these answers. He's thinking a lot about this, and look, God, we want people thinking about their answers. We want interesting. It was an interesting chat, but I just thought there was a clutter. He was a bit cluttered in his thoughts, and that's come out a couple of times in the months since. And like South Africa was the first time he was taken. The second test was the first time he was taken off in an Ireland game all year, and really you can see the trust that the Irish management had in him, I think, began to ebb in South Africa, and then he got to the All Blacks game, and it does look like externally anyway that it looks like he's paid the price for that All Blacks game as much as anyone. Because they put so much on the 10 in terms of organising the team and delivering the performance, and now I don't know, does he need a holiday or does he need to play? But he does look like a fella who just needs something to go right in his game. But the Australian game should have been that moment, or even the Stade game, he was very good, but just Cast didn't go his way. It was really in keeping with the Stormers game before November when he went to South Africa, and obviously there was all sorts going on behind the scenes that led to Roundtree losing his job or stepping away, whatever way it happened. But that wasn't a happy tour. Well, that didn't look like a happy team on Friday night, and it didn't look like he was in the best place to perform.
Yeah. You mentioned discipline. 17 penalties given away by Munster on the night. And Casey's injury on 30 minutes, that's one of 6 players forced off before the 80 minutes with some kind of an injury. Stephen Ferris remarking when Peter O'Mahony pulled up, can't blame Graham Roundtree for that. I suspect that will have found its way to Peter O'Mahony in the interim. Ian Costello, I mean, we're talking about South Africans trying to juggle commitments and Premiership teams and French teams. He was asked about the 6 changes made for this game, and he said, well, look, 6-day turnaround, we've travelled to France, that's the primary reason. He cited the freshness of John Hodnett, who looked very good for being fresh, and he said, we have 6 massive games in a row. We're not in the position we want to be in the URC. Very hard to weigh one competition over the other. So URC table, they're 11th. Obviously, the Interpro game's coming up. And then in this tournament, they'll have Saracens at home on the 11th and then Northampton away. They don't have huge elbow room here.
I do think the Gavin Coombs one seems to have been the one that moved the Munster fans the most.
Okay, Brian Gleeson in for Coombs.
And Gleeson is one of the outstanding young talents in Irish rugby. I have no problem with him getting that exposure, and he's part of that Sam Prendergast team that under-20s team. There's 6 or 7 of them have played in the last 2 weeks. We're seeing them take the next step. No problem with picking him, but I would have at least kept Coombs in reserve. He is a player you want away from home in France. Into Toulon last year, he put the team on his back, and he's that high volume carrier. He is able to physically live with your Papa Leahy's. He's able to get up. He's not the most explosive, dynamic player, but he wins collisions. And I just think he's the kind of player you want in that scenario. And they did miss him. I'm not saying start him. Sure, manage your squad a little bit. But I think he gives you something more than maybe a Jack O'Donoghue off the bench. O'Donoghue's a great experienced player in his own right and has done nothing wrong for Munster. But I just think Coombs' profile fits this game so well. And the other thing to throw in there is the fact there is 2 games over Christmas this year. There's not 3. So there is a break week in there. So they have a week with no game. They will rest their Ireland players, I think, this week up in Ravenhill. I suspect that's when they'll go for it. They'll probably have a stronger team out against Leinster on the 27th. But there's no game after that, the weekend after that, and then they play in round 3 against Saracens at home. So there is a weekend where they can rest players outside of this. But the truth of the matter is for Munster is the URC is more important for them right now. And 11th means they've got ground to make up again. They've done it so often, but one of these years they're not going to get the second half of the season surge. They've often used the South Africa trip in spring as their platform for that surge. Well, that's over. They've gone to South Africa and got no points. So there is a bit of an imperative for them to get points on the board. And the fact they got 5 against Stade leaves them reasonably comfortable, in terms of they really only have to pick off 4 or 5 more points in their next 2 games against English opposition. Now, Saracens are a good, strong team. They're not Saracens of old. And in Northampton away, what Northampton did in Pretoria at the weekend is probably the performance of the weekend. So there's no guarantee that they'll get the points that they need.
They should.
And it was they can.
They can.
I'm not sure they should. I think Castaway was probably an easier
2 points, or
certainly, to get as much as you can out of that. Ultimately, Munster will always be judged on Europe because of their pedigree in this competition, but the hole that they put themselves into at the start of the year has left them in a really difficult spot.
There are different classes of problems. So I did see the headline, Leo Cullen, we'll look at ourselves as coaches. There is no crisis like a Leinster crisis. 9 straight wins, and just like the talk afterwards is as if the season is falling apart. So they beat Claremont too. By the way, are going well, and they showed up trying to win. 4 wins in a row was their form line. They're 3rd in the top 14. So what was Leo Cullen's verdict? He said, we were able to muddle our way through, but it did feel like we were muddling our way through. The reality is that we're not quite where we want to be. But how many other teams can say they're where they want to be? To which nobody whispered back Toulouse.
He said it himself.
Did he?
Yeah, he said it himself. Look, he said I watched Toulouse last week, and we're nowhere near that level at the moment.
Fair enough. That's a different point. So come here. The problem against New Zealand was ring rust. Now the problem is fatigue. Where are we?
I have a theory.
Okay.
I have a theory, and I didn't formulate it in time to ask Leo Cullen about it. It was on the cycle home.
You asked him enough. Don't worry, we'll come to that.
Well, it's another South African. I think a lot of what we're watching at the moment is rooted in the fact that when Stuart Lancaster left Leinster and they appointed Jacques Nienaber, Ireland and Leinster went on divergent paths in terms of the style of play. And when the players now transition from one to the other, it is a massive leap in terms of what they do. So last week, I went to the Leinster press conference on the week before the Bristol game on the Monday, or maybe it was the Tuesday, because they played against Australia and they were in on the Tuesday. And it was getting dark, and the players were only just coming off the pitch. They had been on the pitch for ages, which is unusual. You don't see them at that stage. They're usually on their way home at that point. Apparently, Bernard Jackman said on commentary at the weekend, the meetings were longer because they were trying to get Jordy Barrett. He'd never played 15 in the system. They had to get him. So there is an awful lot of information being loaded onto the players when they come in. What was the phrase Nienaber used last year? He had to program the players for 14 weeks, but to deprogram them from Ireland and program them on Leinster, get them defending the way they want, get them attacking the way they want. The attack hasn't diverged in the same way, but there's an awful lot. Under Lancaster, Mike Catt and Andy Farrell all work together with England. They have a very similar view on the game, I think it's fair to say. Certainly, anytime you listen to Lancaster talk about Leinster and Ireland, he felt that he was preparing the Leinster players almost to play for Ireland, and there was real symbiosis. Farrell never talked about it in the same way, but you did get the sense that cohesion really made it seamless when they moved from one to the other. I think when Joe Schmidt was in charge of Ireland and was picking a heavy bunch of Leinster players, they'd already played for him for 3 years at Leinster, and they would walk in and know what he wanted straight away. I do think now we're seeing the impact of Leinster going down a different route, which is what they feel like they have to do and are within the rights to do. But the impact is that when they go to Portugal to do the Ireland stuff, it's taking longer for it to click. And then when they go back into Leinster, it's taking longer for them to click. And they're only in Leinster for 5 weeks, 5 games before they're back to Ireland again. They have to do it all again, and they're not going to play in all these games. So I don't think we're going to see Leinster really hit their straps until the Six Nations is over and they get the players full time and they can just fully deprogram them. But I'm not saying it's a problem necessarily. I think having Nienaber in the Irish system is brilliant, and these players are definitely learning from it. But it has created a challenge that is making this transition far less seamless than it was. It was remarkable how well Leinster players would flick in and out of Irish and just perform all the time, because it takes other teams a lot longer. But it's the only reason I can think of that things have gotten so clunky in between. Certainly first games up, and to see the amount of drop balls again at the weekend. It was like watching Ireland in November. Again, they won, but they made so many. They weren't unforced errors because Claremont put them under a lot of pressure, and I really thought I liked the way Claremont went about it, and I think they'll learn a lot from that game and the way that they wouldn't if they put 60 points on them the way they sometimes do in December. Yeah. But I do think that Leo Cullen is well placed by saying they can't be playing like this when it comes to the finals rugby, because they won't be in finals rugby for long.
Yeah, it's really interesting theory, difficult one to argue against. As an add-on to it, I had posited it with Keane last week. It was only when Jordy Barrett came on the field last week and you saw the sharpness of his handling and his passing, I did think to myself, well, this is off the back of a season where Leinster have focused more on defence, by their own admission, than attack. And in the way that Joe Schmidt arrived and said we're going to become the best passing team in Europe, and everybody sharpens up 10-15%, and that has a natural consequence for your speed of play and your tempo and your attacking abilities. Maybe if you take 10% back because you're so focused week on week on getting up to Nienaber's defensive standards, maybe that affects things. And I did say to Keane, you know what, maybe Barrett there and just seeing the crispness might just remind these guys, actually, there's no ceiling on the quality of your handling and your passing, because some of these passes are inside shoulder, they're dropped. It's just all of that stuff is in the ether.
I've spoken to a professional coach about it towards the start of the season, and he said, I just think Leinster, the effort it takes to defend in the Nienaber system, it leaves you drained and it leaves you tired when you're attacking. And if you look back to the final against Toulouse, they got into the 22 loads of times, but didn't execute in the way that we would expect them to execute. And I do think there's an energy deficit. And South Africa play a slower game. I know they've amped things up this year, but they like the set piece. They like to slow things down. They're happy to maul. They're happy to keep it tight. And part of that is energy conservation and win it by threes. Pollard knocking it over and winning tight games that they always believe they're going to win. Now they have the pack that they can fall back on. But I think there's something in that as well. It is a very draining way of playing the game.
It's interesting. A few different factors. So How did Barrett do at 15 with Ringrose and Henshaw 12 and 13?
I don't think Geordie Barrett is a 15 anymore. It reminded me a little bit, not to the same extreme, of Robbie Henshaw going back there. I think up until the England game in 2019, Robbie Henshaw was fully convinced he could play 15 again and wanted to do it. And then he did it. He said, "Good, never again." I remember asking him, "Would you like to try it again?" He said, "No." I think once you get into that inside centre position, it's very hard, unless you're young like Jamie Osborne, to do it back and forth. It also was a major challenge to Barrett in that the way Leinster defend, he'd never done it before. So I thought positionally, he was a little bit off, and Claremont tried to exploit it, but probably weren't accurate enough in doing so. He can fill in there, but I wouldn't. Leinster have better fullbacks. I do see him as a 12, with probably Henshaw moving to 13 and Ringrose at 14. I thought Liam Turner struggled on the weekend. That was even Leo Cullen said we gave a couple of guys chances today and they didn't take them, and I think he was one of them, unfortunately, that didn't take his chance.
Did you sense Cullen was a bit peeved afterwards, or?
Yeah, I think. Well, you read the quote where he said, "Look, we have to look ourselves as coaches as well." And Andy Farrell talked about that as well. How, are we setting the best environment for them to perform? But they always say that, but it's the players who's going to pay the price. Did
his demeanour sense real kind of, I don't want to go too far, like disgust and frustration, or is he?
No.
He's
Leo's not like Leo's very even keel.
Yeah.
Even when I know we're going to come to the Snyman exchange. Like, he doesn't lose his rag, Leo, and he's not one to certainly. I never get the sense that he holds grudges about stuff either. He just, I think what he was saying was, we've used 47 players this week. If you don't play well this week, we'll try someone else next week. And like Tommy O'Brien's back fit, I think he's a player that they just need to get playing. He is a really live prospect at 14. They could play Ringrose there.
Yeah.
Like Larmer's back again. I think they missed Larmer. I think he's been a really important player for them for the last while. But yeah. Barrett was playing out of position at 15. Turner was playing out of position at 14. Like, Turner's a centre, so it's tough on him to get his big chance on the right wing. But I thought he was exposed a little bit. But Claremont had done their work and came with a game plan and made every breakdown a contest, made every line out a contest, made it dirty, made it difficult, and put them in really difficult positions. And they had to go win it. And I thought Prendergast showed up when they needed him to do it. Like, for a callow enough 10 to come and make the plays that he made to win the game, essentially, was impressive. And they found a way. And that's kind of what you have to do at this time of year, especially with all of the different things going on, because that could have got away from him. I would love to know what would happen. Like, Porter makes this unbelievable play to get back and intercept. Yeah, he's been outstanding. But had the Claremont executed and got it back to one score with 20 minutes to go, when everything was when Leinster were just consistently dropping the ball, that would have been a really interesting scenario for Leinster to kind of think their way through, because they're just not scoring as freely. They're not finding the scores as easily as they used to.
No. Prendergast, for the Ringrose try, there was a trademark wraparound and delivered the pass at the right moment, and you see all the ingredients, which has people very excited. He sort of gave a slightly self-conscious roll of the eyes when he got player of the match on the bench. Was he player of the match?
No, I don't. And he said it himself. We spoke to him afterwards. His piece is going out tomorrow.
Right.
He was like I wasn't the best player on the pitch. He was really annoyed with the 2 line kicks that he missed. Like, I get the sense he holds himself to pretty high standards, and
That's good, because it did strike me. I'd seen a few people say, I don't know, is he man of the match, player of the match? But obviously the media are giving these player of the matches, and like, there's a kind of a hype train which everybody wants.
Players are giving Donal Lennon, who in fairness is also in the media.
Sorry, I didn't. I wasn't sure.
It was one or the other.
It was RT, not TNT.
I think so. I could be wrong about that.
Might have been. They're the host broadcaster. Regardless, so a former player looked at him and gave player of the match.
I like to differentiate between former players and the media, because
true.
They like to differentiate themselves from us when it suits them. So.
Sorry, Andy Farrell's driving the hype train. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's not media led, actually, but I'm glad that he has a clear-eyed assessment of his own performance to know, I wasn't the player of the match, I actually did a few things wrong, because the danger for him now is to be putting in a performance which had some good parts on Saturday, but is kind of a 7 out of 10 performance, and him thinking, God, everyone seems pretty happy with me. That's all I need to worry about. Grand.
Yeah, well, the argument is that he's been promoted ahead of his station, that he didn't earn the stuff because he hadn't done enough to get capped by Ireland, and Andy Farrell's plucked him out of relative obscurity and played him. And that the message that sends is that you're the chosen one. You just have to go and play. I don't think that really is. I think there's more of a project going on behind the scenes with him. Bringing Sexton back on board as a mentor.
And he gets that. He doesn't think he's the.
I don't think so.
Yeah.
I think he thinks he's the best out half. in Ireland, if not beyond, in his own head, and just needs the games to prove it, because I think he's an incredibly confident young man. But like, he is probably the best, if not the best 21-year-old in the world. He's one of the top three. Like, he was the best under-20s player in his year, certainly up there anyway, with a couple of the French lads were pretty good.
You realise with lines like that, you can't suddenly differentiate yourself from the hype train.
I think he's justifying it. Like, no, I think he is. Like, you have to. You look at the under 20 World Cup in 2023. He was one of the best players at that tournament, sure. And then he's making, like, you know, Chris Jones was talking of the BBC. A neutral observer was talking about him as the Test 10 in the Lions next year. So he has momentum behind him, but he has things to work on. And he
he's
knows
getting
tired within games a little bit, because he's never had as little space on a rugby pitch as he had in that Australia game. So he'd never experienced that before, and then he's now backed up 5. You know, he never played an international game. Like, he made his Ireland international a month ago today. So he was an uncapped international 32 days ago. Yeah. He's gone off the bench, start for Ireland, start for Leinster in Europe. I'd say he'll get a weekend off this week, and then he might go down to Thomond if we're all lucky. He has learned more in this last 31 days than he was able to do in all the training sessions he's had. And I think he's justified his selection on both fronts. But he has to keep justifying it. It's like, you can't just, and he knows that. He's too focused and too serious. Like, he's quite a serious young guy who fully believes that he can get to that level, but knows he has to put the work in. But like, you got cautionary, like Jack Crowley's a little bit of a cautionary tale. We got Joey Carberry shushing the crowd in Ravenhill. Like, you know, he's on the comeback after kind of burning bright and then going off the boil. So it's never linear, it's never straightforward, and he's going to have bad days. If Saturday was a bad day, then he's going to be pretty good. And like, even the fact that he forced the penalty that led to the yellow card and kicked the penalty that basically made it a 2-score game and won it for Leinster, as well as laying on both tries for Max Deegan passes. He's contributing heavily to their scoring. As he gets more experienced, he will only do more of that. And some of his decision making, some of his manipulation of space, his line kicking until it stopped being good, it's outstanding. The meters he's getting out of those kicks. The two he missed were poor. I do think he's tiring, and I think he probably needs a break after that's a very intense month. But look, I think if you're picking an Ireland team to play next weekend, he's playing.
Was there any, and we can breeze by this quickly enough if not, was there any great insight into why they were 50-50 on lineouts?
57, I think, but I mean, even the ones they won were unclean.
Because Claremont gave away 15 penalties. That should be like, you've no chance of being anywhere near us.
It's happening a lot. Like, teams seem to be quite happy to let Irish, like the Australia game, they were up at 17, 18 lineouts, weren't they? Like John McCarthy said, they went through the whole menu.
Yeah.
I asked Leo Cullen about the lineout, and he said it's not usually a problem for us, which I thought was a little bit of, because I did say, look, Ireland had struggles.
Is he saying Ireland have infected us?
It's an Ireland issue, not a Leinster issue. I'm trying to think back to the Champions Cup final. I do think Toulouse disrupted them a couple of times out of touch at key moments.
Okay.
They are generally more reliable. Like, they're not coming up against the All Blacks and the Springboks as regularly. But the same players are. I can't imagine November was any good for Owen Kelleher's confidence. Or, you know, I know James Ryan doesn't call the line out for Ireland, but he is calling it for Leinster with the help of Max Deegan, who's kind of built himself into a bit of a line out forward. There was a whole myriad of issues. I mean, Claremont attacked them hard at the start. They went after, even on the 5 metre line, they went up. Rather than stay down and maul, which you often do, they saw this as a way of getting at Leinster, and it was a really good piece of analysis. And that, I think Cullen was saying, that fed into their jitteriness around it, and they started rushing it and they started making bad decisions because Claremont got into their head. So
it's not a reputation you want to acquire.
Well, that's the thing, and teams are watching, because it's the same players. I'm sure teams are watching November and going, if we can slow them down to breakdown and take away their line out, they're not going to be able to score, because the majority of points come. So I think wider it is the biggest issue in Irish rugby right now is the fact that for some reason lineouts are average and below average at times, and you know, it claims to be a high class world leading high performance environment. Well, at the moment, I wouldn't say you could say the Irish lineout or that Leinster lineout the weekend is a high performing environment. It needs to improve an awful lot, and it's undermining a lot of the good stuff that's going on.
I did see the headline, Leo Cullen, that's private, and my genuinely my first thought was O'Connor. He definitely asked something.
Yeah.
But it wasn't a remotely offensive question. It was a perfectly fair one. So The gist of it being, is there something in the contract whereby RG Snyman can't play ahead of the Irish locks?
Yeah. I mean,
what does It's Private tell you?
It's contractual, or else they don't want to talk about their team's selection strategy for want that other teams will know that they're not going to be picking Snyman. I'd say the contractual side is more likely to be.
I interpret it as, yes, that is in the contract, therefore I'm not answering. If it wasn't in the contract, I think he would have just said no.
I don't think it'd be in Snyman's contract necessarily. It's an agreement with the IRFU. I'm sure it would have been communicated with Snyman, but Snyman, I'm sure, is happy enough to ring up Razzie and say, come here, Razzie, like, they're going to play me for 25, 30 minutes a match. Like, Razzie, absolutely, learn everything there is to know about them. Get it, play in a high performance environment, get yourself fit, son, and then come back and we'll start you, because he's starting for the Springboks. And maybe it suits all parties, because he is an unbelievable player to bring off your bench.
Yes.
It's one of these things that, like, when he signed for Leinster, there was definitely word from the IRFU was like, this isn't carte blanche to pick him ahead of the Irish lads, which would have been a stick that would be if he was starting ahead of Joe McCarthy, who actually does look like he needs a bit of a rest at the moment. But people will be up in arms about that. Like, Ireland need John McCarthy playing games, and he's at key stage in his development. You're playing the South African ahead of him, so it would have been the sticks to beat them either way. And just last week, I think it was Will actually texted me and said, "What's the story with Snyman?" And we'd been chatting about it. A couple of journalists over in Bristol, and we'd all kind of had heard similar things. So I said, why not put him on the record about it and see what the story is. So, but it's private. It does sound like they're maybe having stuck to the agreement quite rigidly and pleased the RFU in that regard. They might be getting permission to sign him again, which I think Leinster fans will be pretty pleased about. They're going to flog him in the URC and get him as much out of him there as possible, and then use him as an impact sub in Europe. And I'd say if either Ryan or McCarthy go down in the Six Nations, they'll have carte blanche to start him then.
And so would the same extent to Geordie Barrett in big Champions Cup games?
I don't believe so. I think Barrett is such a short term deal. Look, even looking at what's happened to them since he signed, all the lads have fallen down. I think they just say, look, I don't think it's going to be the same stipulation. Okay. Now, you could argue that he is going to stand in Jamie Osborne's way, for example, of getting valuable minutes, but Leo Cullen painted a very vivid picture of Casper Gabriel as the next bright young thing who's coming through the Leinster Academy.
His name a few times.
Yeah, 19-year-old from Austria who's playing for Turner in the AAL, but he's in the Leinster. You got a full Leinster Academy contract straight out of school, because Toulouse were sniffing around him, I think, and he was trailing Geordie Barrett around the Aviva on Friday at the captain's run, kicking alongside him, watching his every move, and that's the vision you're selling, is that Jamie Osborne is getting 7 months watching this guy, an All Black who, in fairness, like Geordie Barrett and Jamie Osborne, not to put them in the same bracket as players necessarily, although I think Jamie Osborne's an excellent player, but they both started off as kind of jacks of all trade, and Barrett ended up being a 12, having been able to play all those positions. There is a lot that Jamie Osborne will take from playing alongside him and watching him.
Yeah.
And Osborne could fight his way in there, but it's such a short-term thing. It just kind of fell in their laps a little bit. I don't believe there's the same parameters around playing him.
Yeah. Well, again, the line out aside, I don't think you can call any of the questions I've asked you problems. These are all really, really good situations.
They're in a great position. The only thing I am very conscious of is waving all these things through and going, it'll be all right on the night. And even, I think we're all watching Man City with such kind of grim fascination at the moment that like all empires do fail. And all great teams do come to an end. And I did ask Andy Farrell at the start of November, was he worried that his team has reached the end of its cycle and it was in need of renewal? And he rejected it. And I'm not sure there was great evidence over November to say that they've come out of that's negative tailspin. I don't say tailspin's too strong, but that negative trend. I think they are not the team that they were. And Leinster have been in 3 European finals in a row and have been consistent across 7 or 8 years, really, of getting to the end. I don't expect them to fall away, but you have to be a little bit aware of the fact that they're not playing well, that they go to La Rochelle in their next game, who are not playing brilliantly themselves, and Roger was quite critical of them, despite the fact that they were that they won handsomely at the weekend. But you lose to La Rochelle, suddenly you're going on the road in the knockouts a little bit. You've got this weird scenario where Toulouse and Bordeaux, two of the best teams in the tournament, are in the same pool and won't play against each other, but one of them will end up away in the semi-final. So you could be welcoming a Bordeaux instead of a Northampton, and like Northampton nearly took them out last year. So they're not that much better than everyone else that they can afford to play like they did at the weekend. So we can't just brush them all away as first world problems, because at the elite edge of the tournament they're in, there's not much margin for error. So we think we need to talk about it and comment on it while accepting that they have won all their games this year and have Dan Sheehan's back potentially as quickly as the Six Nations. Tyg Furlong, we hope will be back on the pitch. I mean, if the RFU wouldn't have given him a 2-year deal if they didn't think his body was going to come right, you put those two players in the team and that's a different proposition. So
are they home or away to La Rochelle?
Away. Yeah. So there's 2 Interpros, a weekend off, and then La Rochelle. So it's pretty much straight into it in the new year.
It is full on. There's no doubt.
Yeah.
Like the big handful who by the end of a Lions tour are just going to be heaving.
Yeah.
Ulster 19, Bordeaux 40, we should touch on. So Ulster gambled a little bit with the weakened team away to Toulouse in the hope that at home to Bordeaux, who are obviously a very good team now, they might magic something up. You could look at the scoreline and think, God, they were hockeyed, but they were winning by 5 points on the hour mark.
Yeah.
And then Damien Penaud scored a try, Joey Carberry converted, cupped his ears to the Ulster crowd, and then Bordeaux scored 26 unanswered points.
Yeah.
3 more tries. Ian Henderson uttered the immortal line, nobody wants to ship 100 points in 2 games. You're not wrong. 101 and 15 tries. I mean, the way they've tried to dress this up a touch is Leinster and the URC, Toulouse away, Bordeaux. We always knew this was going to be sticky. Probably weren't anticipating that sticky.
No, and then you got Munster at home and Connacht away in the next 2 games. And again, like Munster, Ulster don't have a squad really strong enough to fight on 2 fronts. And that's why part of the reason Richie Murphy took the decision he did to go to Toulouse with a weakened team and try and pick up. Really, that whole effort was designed to almost have Toulouse so far ahead that they switch off and you sneak a bonus point, which would be very valuable in the end by scoring 4 tries. And they got 3, but ultimately they've got nothing now. And it's
they may well bin off rounds 3 and 4 this.
Well, an English team would. There's an argument for it. Like, they've got extra chiefs. They've still got enough left in this pool that they could squeeze in if they, because this tournament, it's almost harder to get knocked out than stay in it. And the Challenge Cup could be a nice thing for them to get involved in. You can get into that via this tournament and then make a really good fist of it because, and like Ulster, our club, I've often said it was a Connacht as well. They could just do it a final, like getting to Cardiff in June and having a day out for your fans, and a couple of clubs have used the Challenge Cup to really kick on. That could be a nice way for it because if they get an away last 16 game in Europe, they're just in for more pain. Like, they've cut their budget by 10% this season. They let a lot of experience go at the end of last year. They're in a rebuilding phase. The point was made to me on Saturday that results like this is what cost the last 2 Ulster coaches their jobs. So Richie Murphy's in year 1. I do think he's a good coach and he will do a good job there, but these are not good results, and I think the understanding of where they're at has to be there. But are they? Is that enough to be able to go be 5 points up going into the last quarter against a very, very good Bordeaux team who hammered Connacht at a similar stage last year? Well, like, Ulster see themselves as better than Connacht, and having rested the lads the previous week, they would have banked on an 80-minuter, but they just don't have 23 players. I don't think at the moment to be able to do that. Certainly not against a big spending team with Bill Beret and Penaud on the wings and all the the talent that the Moefana, that back line that Bordeaux has is up there with anyone in the tournament.
I haven't seen much of Carberry. He must enjoy playing in that back line.
Yeah, and they decided not. It's been okay. He did his wrist earlier on his debut. He hurt himself and missed 5-6 weeks. But he's been back. He's kind of in and out with Jalabert. He's Jalabert's backup essentially, but he can also play. He's come on a full back in games. The bits I've seen, he's been tidy without being spectacular. But I'd say, life's good. Like, he had his first child with his wife over the summer at the time where they moved. A lot's changed for him in the last while, and I'd say the move has come at a good time for him. It's a nice place to live. He's got an Irish coach there who he'd know from his old days at Leinster and Noel McNamara, which I'm sure helps him. It's a bit of an international squad. There's a couple of Australians in that Bordeaux team as well, so it's not the worst, the hardest place in the world to go and live. So he hasn't done many interviews since he's gone. We haven't really heard from him, but he is. He's still a fine player, and he's still relatively young. I think his plan is to play 2 years and come back to Ireland and kick on with Ireland. But once you start enjoying life in France, it can be hard to turn your back on that. And he's in a squad there that he could win a European Cup. They're more than capable of going all the way in this tournament. They got hammered in the semi-final of the top 14 last year by Toulouse and 60 odd points, and it looked like a really damaging one. But they've come back quite strong at the start of this year, and they take Europe seriously. They've a lovely style of play, and they're one of the teams that are worth tuning into in this tournament as it kind of gets going.
Yeah. Okay, so Christmas upon us, Interpros, and then reconvene for Champions Cup, and then Six Nations, and then on we go is kind of the gist. I was asking you, possibly the next time we speak in the new year, we'll have both seen it, and we might try and talk to a player or two from that England 03 team, because this Unbreakable documentary is certainly capturing the imagination within the rugby world, and even a little bit beyond. So it's obviously 20 years since England won the World Cup in 03, and they've made a documentary, and it just seems for like a team that were the definition of strong men who almost willed themselves to the peak. That's how I see them, teak tough. They've had a difficult 20 years, or lots of them have anyway. Brain damage, suspected CTE, loneliness, mental health generally, finances. I saw Ben Cohen has said he sold his World Cup medal during the pandemic, this kind of stuff. So Phil Vickery is like the on-screen narrator, and he goes around and visits a handful of old teammates, and they chat about the difficulties. And Vickery himself said, I've suffered mentally and physically, a lot of operations, pain. I've gone through a divorce, wrap up a bit of bankruptcy in there as well. It's been a bit of an effing shitstorm, really. Johnny Wilkinson uses the word fragile about the team.
Yeah.
He sees them as quite a fragile bunch despite the exterior. So it's no shock. It's not like it's kind of well-worn topic. But in 03, you would have really looked at that group and thought, ooh, they're kind of forged. But obviously very, very vulnerable people as well, you know.
I like it's just the price of success almost. It's like if it becomes all consuming and it's everything, then when it stops, what's it actually worth to you? You've got a piece of you've got a gold medal and a picture on the wall, and you'd hope memories, although some of them don't have those memories anymore, which is very unique probably to that era of
the
rugby.
clip is Steve Thompson with them, and I think Vickery sort of saying, what do you remember about it? And he's like, nothing. So what do you mean? He's like, I don't remember being in Australia. Forget the games. I don't remember being in Australia for 6-7 weeks.
And that's almost like that's its own thing. Like that's beyond that's its own. I mean, he's done a documentary himself on it, so it's that's almost a separate one, but and a more serious one, really. But the mental toll. You think back to the World Cup and Ireland going out in the quarterfinals when they all believed their destiny was to win this thing and that it would be life changing for them, and it would have put them on another level, and it would have some of them could have died. Certainly Sexton could have dined out. Sexton's not the type to dine on it for the rest of his years, but he could. I mean, he could still dine out in his career anyway if he wanted it, and he doesn't. But actually, what would it have been? Like at the end of the day, when they came home empty-handed, what difference has it made to those players' lives? Yes, they're all still on TV if they want to be. They're still, if you watch a TNT game, there's Ben Kay, there's Austin Healy, Matt Dawson does BBC. They're still very ever present. Martin Johnson's still on the BBC during the Six Nations.
Lalios.
They're still very much there, but none of them have become coaches really. They're. I just don't know if it really has done what you'd expect a World Cup to do when you think it's going to change your life and make and be that transformative thing. It does for a while. I mean, they were all back playing for their teams the next week, so that wouldn't happen these days. But it's like this thing that they all chase. When they all, I mean, I think that there's it's framed now more as the journey, and that the destination is nice, but it's more about being present and being, all that sort of stuff. And maybe that's a much healthier way of looking at it. But it always struck me as a cold enough team that they were never. It didn't seem like a very tight bunch. So they were tight in one way, but it was very macho and masculine and alphas all over the place. Out of that Leicester old school ex-amateur, that sort of thing. So I'm kind of rambling now, but there's a lot in it, and I'm looking forward to seeing it. I don't know if looking forward to it, right? It looks heavy, but it looks like if you're interested in team dynamics and what makes the price of success, it's fascinating.
For sure. We're out of time. Rory O'Connor of the Irish Independent. I know you'll be at the Interpros over Christmas. I might see you in the new year. Thanks, Mel.
Cheers.